Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I am very grateful to be here today. I'm very excited. When I got the invitation to speak here today, I was really overwhelmed by emotions to come back to my home country after 15 years. Let's hope the presentation starts soon. I can start by saying that the presentation is about advances that we made in the last few decades in the field of prenatal genetic diagnosis. And as the presentation starts, I have a few slides. Okay. So, yeah, thank you very much. First, a couple of disclosures. I have no conflict of interest, so I'm not paid by any company to promote their products. Second of all is that I'm not a genetician. I'm speaking about prenatal genetic diagnosis, but I'm actually an obstetrician. I do genetic counseling and diagnosis as a hobby and a passion. And another passion of mine is being here today. This is a photo of mine almost 20 years ago when I was a student in medical city with a couple of old friends and colleagues. And these are the colleagues that I'm working with now. So I work in the Alnasiry University Hospital, and this is the department, this is the hospital, and this is the department I work with. And I counsel people with genetic diagnosis 2 or 3 times a week. So this is a quick overview through my presentation. I hope to be in time. Basics of genetics, we will run through it quickly, and then we will talk about Down syndrome as an example, the prototype of a genetic syndrome that needs to be diagnosed. Then we'll discuss the techniques we use to diagnose genetic syndromes, amniocentesis, corneal sampling, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And then we will talk more in details about the genetic analyses we use, like karyotyping, rapid info detection, microarrays. And then the most exciting part of my talk will be the new modern methods of diagnosis, like the non-invasive prenatal test, the LIPT or NIPT, which you will be hearing more about, I think, in the future. And then we'll finish up with some future perspectives and discussion of ethical issues. So this is, I don't know why it's running by itself, but this is a cell of the body, and of course you all know that the genetic material we have is stored in the nucleus of the cell in some molecule called the DNA. And if you look at the DNA, it's a very long structure that is composed of a double stranded helix. A double-stranded helix, that forms chromosomes during divisions. And I will leave you with one metaphor to help you understand how this works. And that's if you compare your genetic material to a big bookshelf, you can consider the chromosomes as shelves, and each shelf contains books, which are genes. And the nucleotides are actually comparable to letters within a chapter, within a book on a shelf. So this is the kind of degree of zooming in which we are doing when we're doing genetic analysis. So who comes to us for genetic diagnosis and counseling? Well, basically you have 3 categories of people. We have people with an affected child, like first one on the left here, people with Down syndrome. Couples come to us with explanation why it happened to them, and most importantly, the chance of recurrence. Second are couples with one or two of them having a carrier state of a genetic syndrome, like a carrier state of cystic fibrosis. And they also want to know what their chances is of having a baby with the disease. And the third, and probably the most commonly encountered in our practice as an obstetrician, is a suspicion of a genetic disease in a current pregnancy based on a congenital malformation. So how do we get about it? Let's take Down syndrome as a perfect example of a genetic syndrome, which is of course the most commonly encountered genetic disease. It's been discovered by London Down in 1866, so 150 years ago. This guy described the clinical features we all know about babies with Down syndrome: the typical faces, the epicanthal folds, the extra thickness of the skin around the neck, the short femurs or stature, and the heart defects. And it took us about 100 years later for geneticians to discover that it's a genetic syndrome. It's about an extra chromosome, number 21. And luckily, we discovered later that we can discover this extra chromosome by doing amniocentesis. And this is the golden standard of diagnosing Down syndrome in many parts of the world. You can see here, this is a cardiogram. So a description of all the chromosomes in a cell, and you can see number 21 has 3 chromosomes instead of 2. So, how do we come to the diagnosis of Down syndrome? And Down syndrome, again, is just an example. We can do the same with any other genetic syndrome. We usually do it by taking invasive tests. What we want to do is take a sample of fetal tissue in which cells are harboring this genetic material. So the invasive tests we use in obstetrics are either a chorionovilus sampling, which was done between 11 and 14 weeks. And this is basically the technique. We pass a small catheter through the vagina, through the cervix, to the placenta, and then take a small sample of a couple of milligrams or grams of tissue to the lab and test them. And of course, the placenta has the same genetic makeup as the baby, so you can use it to diagnose chromosomal anomalies of the baby. And the other one is amniocentesis, which is more commonly used, which is easier to perform. You perform it later in pregnancy, 15 to 18 weeks, or you can perform it at any time after that. And the technique is just passing a very fine needle through the abdominal wall, through the amniotic cavity, through the uterine wall to the amniotic cavity, and aspire 20 cc of amniotic fluid, which has amniocytes that you can culture. And it gives you the same answer as CVS, is the chromosomal makeup of the baby, normal or abnormal. But, so just to go back here, this implicates that woman who has an invasive test is going to consider doing something with the results, because you wouldn't subject a woman to this invasive test just for fun, just for knowing that the baby has. So usually the implication or the consequence of doing this invasive test is considering a termination of pregnancy, which is of course a very difficult decision to make for pregnant women. So luckily we have an alternative to terminating the pregnancy, and that's testing the baby before pregnancy happens. So how we can do that? There's a technique called PGD, or peri-implantation genetic diagnosis, which Dr. Salwan also spoke about, which is basically doing an IVF, even if the woman is not subfertile. So if she has a fertility problem, you still need to do an IVF, making up 4 or 5 embryos, and then taking one cell of the embryo, or one blastocyst, and by biopsying it. And this, of course, will reflect the genetic makeup of the whole blood of the whole baby once it grows. And then, of course, you bring back, or you transfer the embryos with a normal genetic makeup, and the ones that have the abnormality you don't just throw away. So this protects the woman from this difficult decision of terminating a wanted pregnancy. But of course, you have to think of the costs, the risks, and all the other issues regarding IVF pregnancy. But of course, it's an alternative. Okay, so what do we do when we get the material? We said we can analyze the whole chromosome. Here you see a whole chromosome, which you can analyze as being normal in number or abnormal. So the first, let's say, category of analysis are chromosomal analysis, numerical analysis, and this can be done by karyotyping the genetic material we obtain, or doing a fish analysis, which is a fluorescent in situ hybridization, or doing a rapid analysis by qFPCR. I will not go into details. I don't think you appreciate the details of all these genetic tests because they are quite complicated. But just to know that this is the most simple way to do genetic analysis. The second, and we are getting more difficult here, is to get to analyzing genes. So parts of the chromosome that harbors the genetic information, which consists of many nucleotides, like for example, these small parts are difficult to detect by karyotyping. This you can analyze by the different sorts of microarray analysis. And this is something that we do standardly in the lab. When the chromosomal analysis returns normal, we go ahead and do a microarray analysis to detect micro deletions, small deletions or duplications. And then the third part, and the most difficult to achieve, and of course the one that gives you the most answers, is the nucleotide sequencing. So you don't look at whole chromosomes or at gene levels. You look at each letter. You remember the bookshelf? You look at each letter of the whole genetic makeup, and then you look for abnormalities there. And this is called next generation sequencing. I will be talking about that in a few slides. So, what is next? What is the future? I think this guy is a very important one to remember as well. I'm not sure whether Professor Kunda also knows him. It's Dennis Law. He's the founder of the technique used to detect fetal DNA in maternal blood. So it's of course a revolutionary technique. It's a new way of looking at genetic tests. And if this guy continues what he's doing, I'm sure he will someday get a Nobel Prize. Because what he has discovered is that this is a maternal blood vessel, these are maternal blood cells. Of course, there are free DNA circulating in that maternal blood, which gives you information on the genetic makeup of the woman. But if you look closely, there's about 2% of this DNA not from the mother, but rather from the fetus, or more correctly, from the placenta. And from this 2%, we can isolate enough information about the baby while in utero. So this is the technique to do it. You can isolate just a simple blood test from the mother, isolating her blood and her DNA, together with the whole mix of genetic material, and then by subtracting the two signals from each other, you'll get the fetal genotype. And of course, this is, as I said, a big thing in prenatal genetic diagnosis field, and many companies have rushed to develop their own platforms and tests, and maybe you know a couple of those names. These are different names for NIPT companies and NIPT tests. And the important thing in this slide is to see how good the detection is of Down syndrome. It's almost unbelievable that the test can have detection rates of 99.9, 100%, more than 99. So it's a fantastic test to detect Down syndrome. And the most important of that is that it's a non-invasive test, so no risk of miscarriage. Also worth noting is the very low false positive rates in detecting Down syndrome. So only less than 1% or maybe 1 in 1,000 gets a false positive test, which avoids unnecessary tests. And is also almost as good to detect trisomy 18, 13, and monosomy X. So, what are the drawbacks? So, of course, if you have this interesting test, this will lead to a drop in amniocentesis rates. So, more people choosing for a non-invasive test will lead to less amniocentesis, which is, of course, a good thing. And the future of NIPT would be to go and look further and deeper to, as I said, microdeletions and small variances in the genetic material, also through a non-invasive technique. But the test is nowadays only validated for chromosomal analysis, but I'm sure the future will add to the list of genetic diagnoses being detected by NIPT. So what is more in the future? So you can see from this slide the way we went through the past decades. So we went from a simple in situ hybridization technique called the FISH, detecting only trisomy 21, 13, and 18 in a sample. So it's a very limited test in terms of detection, and it's costly and it's labor intensive, so not suitable for routine practice. Then we had the PCR technique, which helps us detect aneuploidy rapidly by PCR amplifies a signal from a single chromosome, and then you'll have your detection within a couple of days. So that was a quick way, still very expensive, but a quick way of detecting aneuploidy. And then we came to the era of microarrays. Here's a microarray chip, as you can see, you have a reference DNA and a test DNA, and the test will tell you, I see more or less of a chromosome compared to a reference DNA in this sample, which detects, as I said, smaller changes, not a chromosomal, not a whole chromosome, but microdeletions of replication. And this is the future, really, and this is next generation sequencing. And what it does is it amplifies parts of the whole genome. So not a specific chromosome, but the whole genetic material of a person can be amplified and sequenced, so you get these letters which are put in a library, and then by very difficult bioinformatics and statistics, we get the answer from the lab that there is a small genetic variance in this data. So to explain more, imagine that this is a DNA which codes an RNA, messenger RNA. This is composed of an intron and an exon, and only the exons are really relevant because they are the ones that code for proteins, and those are the ones that can harbor a mutation. And what whole next generation sequencing or whole exome sequencing looks at all the exons in the whole body of all chromosomes. So it's a massive amount of data and work to go through to get the results. And you can compare the exome to just one slice of an apple compared to the whole apple. Skip that slide and go the other way. Okay, so my last slide, the one before last, is imagine that you have complex disease. So now we're not talking about simple diseases like Down syndrome, easy detectable by simple measures. We are talking about complex diseases like, for example, mental retardation of epilepsy. It's never easy to jump and get the diagnosis straight away. So say that you suspect this child of having a Rett syndrome, so you can order a very specific test for Retts, which is an efficient way of doing it. The bad news is that only very few percentage of babies with epilepsy have Retts. So the major problem with epilepsy as a syndrome is that you have many other causes of it, which cannot be detected by a specific gene detection. So you need to go for something more deeper, which is like a copy number variant by microarray analysis, or the gene panel analysis, which is like, as I said, like another chip with a microarray, because it looks at many genes, not only one gene. And then, as I said, the future will be to have the whole genome or the exome sequenced, and then it will give you massive data, and then of course you need to have a clever bioinformatician and genetician to go through the data and come to the conclusion the baby has a genetic variance and this chromosome as a cause of this symptom. My last slide is about the ethical issue, and I think we need just to take a moment and think of the important implications of what we are doing. It's not about having a test and getting the test to the woman, yes or no, but think of the implications of having a result of an abnormal genetic makeup in the baby. The one thing I'm really worried about is gender selection, because we all know in some cultures male infants, male babies are preferred to female, and the techniques we are using now are very simple to being introduced into clinical practice, and gives you a very quick and simple answer to the sex of the baby very early in pregnancy. So before we go and introduce such a test into the community and to the practice, think of the implications of it, or the misuse of this test in selecting babies, and we might end up in a world where such lovely female babies don't exist anymore. I am, of course, exaggerating. Second is the designer baby. So why stop at selecting the sex of the baby? You can also select the color of eyes or hair, because those are all information stored within your genetic material, and you can also detect those very early in pregnancy, and then of course select the embryos that have these genes to transfer back. So the issue of designer baby is something to think about in the future. And also VOUS, or variances of unknown significance, is a trade-off of the amount of data we get. We get lots of data from complex tests, and sometimes you have a variance that you cannot say it's normal or abnormal. So you have a baby unborn, so you don't know whether he is functioning well, but he has a small change in one of the letters. You're not sure, does it mean an abnormality in the future or not? So it doesn't fit in the category of the abnormalities. It doesn't fit in the category of normal variance. Sometimes it's in between. And this gives a dilemma for both counselor and people receiving the counseling is, so what do I do with this information? And the last thing is accidental findings. So you are interested in knowing if the baby has, for example, cystic fibrosis, and then you discover that the baby has a gene which predisposes it to breast cancer in the future. So this is not why you screen the baby for, but these are the accidental findings you might come across, and you need to think of that also before doing these tests. So I will finish with these final thoughts. So the future looks bright, I'm sure of that, at least from a technical point of view. We have lots of possibilities. The possibilities are endless, and we live at a time that we have very quick analyses, rather cheap, and they can give us massive amounts of information on the genetic material of unborn babies. But the drawback is, with more knowledge comes more dilemmas, how to deal with these, and we need to think of those in the future. I hope I left you with enough food for thoughts and enough things to be like this baby, really thinking the whole time of what's going to happen to him. And I hope not to left you with this kind of sleepy baby because you're bored with my talk. Thank you very much.